Hello, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Brian. I'm a third-year psychology major. Today, I'm going to be talking about my summer internship at the Emotion Health and Psychophysiology Lab at UC San Francisco. And in my presentation, I'm going to be talking about a little bit about what the lab was about, what I did as an intern, and then the lessons I learned along the way. And so just a little bit more information about the Emotion Health and Psychophysiology Lab. So this lab was located at UC San Francisco. Now they've actually moved to Yale. This lab studies different types of topics in psychology, how the mind connects with the body. They study emotions, they study aging, stress, and racial biases. But what connects all these topics together are the physiological measurements this lab does. So the specialty of this lab is just recording the physiological measurements of these responses. And the PI of this lab is Dr. Wendy Berry Mendez. And on the picture, you can see where the lab is located. So yeah. And I'm going to be talking a little bit more about a study design that you might see in this lab. This is just a hypothetical research project, but I think the format is kind of pretty similar. So for example, a potential research topic could be not thinking about our negative feelings can lead to less stress. So in the beginning, as researchers do, we will first take a baseline physiological measurement. And that could be something like blood pressure and heart rate. Then we'll have them do a questionnaire. So usually this questionnaire will also assess their levels of stress, maybe their levels of emotion. Then we will have a video. And often these videos will be a tutorial. So since our hypothetical research project is not thinking about our negative feelings, the video will help them tell the participant not to think about our negative feelings. Then we'll have a stressful task because we want to elicit different physiological responses. And often all these stressful tasks is basically giving a speech, similar to how I'm giving this presentation, because lots of research shows that giving a speech elicits a lot of stressful responses. And then we will do a questionnaire. Throughout this process, we'll be measuring their physiological responses and then comparing it with the baseline physiological measurements in the beginning. And usually in this lab, there will be a postdoc who will kind of be supervising the experiment. There will be a research coordinator who would also help out. And then the interns will be the one actually running the study. And then some physiological measurements include heart rate, blood pressure, skin temperature, etc. So now more specifically, what does an intern do? Well, an intern can be an experimenter. An experimenter is kind of what you would think a research assistant might do. They basically, follow the script, they follow the protocol, they bring out the laptop, stuff like that. And what is a little bit different from a physiological lab intern from, let's say, compared to a regular psychology lab intern, is that a person who works in this lab will have to know how to set up the physiological equipment, which can be kind of tricky. So for example, you see in the picture, the person putting the tape around the neck. We have to do that in 10 minutes because often there are different studies running at the same time, and it can be a little tricky. But I think with anything in life, with practice, all of this becomes a little bit easy. So yeah. And then sometimes we will be an operator. So an operator is basically a person who starts the physiological measurements. They will be the one on the intercom. So something 5 minutes is up. Please return to your seat or something like that. And they'll say it over the intercom. And we need someone to start the physiological measurements and also just take a look at it because because sometimes a electrode might fall off or a tape might be unwound because the participant was moving too much. And so all these things really require the operators to be on top of things and to keep track. And sometimes the intern will be a confederate. So a confederate is basically actor. So for example, there was a study in which we had a white confederate who was also a research assistant, and we had a black participant, and the white actor would make microaggressions. And then in the lab, we will measure their physiological responses of the Black participant when these like microaggressions were being said, and then we will compare it with the baseline. So yeah. And then also we'll be the evaluator. So as evaluator, basically you're the one that's inducing the stress. You're just sitting there staring menacingly at the participants, and that really like induces a lot of physiological responses. I'm going to be talking about some actual studies. I'm going to be a little bit more general because I think some of these studies are still going on. So for example, there was a study in which we elicited people the emotion of awe. So like being really impressed of like seeing a beautiful natural landscape or something like that. And then we elicited that emotion. We saw their physiological responses. And then we had them come together and do a certain activity. And I think one of the questions the postdoc was trying to find out to see if their like physiological responses did match. Like because in psychology research, sometimes when people are talking, their heart rate will be similar, stuff like that. So these are some actual studies I was a part of. And then some other miscellaneous tasks will be something like data work. So often we will, translate the physiological data into numbers on the spreadsheet, so it can be analyzed through R. We will post flyers around San Francisco. So actually, so you see the picture of Pier 31. That is actually where I posted a flyer on that blue lamp pole. I think it's probably taken down by now, but that was pretty cool. And then we also did some basic preliminary data analysis, nothing too much, more like just find the mean, stuff like that. And then we also did some experimental design. What I mean by that is that one of the postdocs, Dr. Guvara, basically like had us sit in a table and we talked about like what are the flaws in this methodology, how can we improve this step in the research. And it was those experiences in which I felt like I learned a lot through this internship. Yeah. And then we also attended tutorials, and tutorials are basically kind of like workshops. So different staff at the UCSF Department of Psychiatry will come in and then they'll tell their like story, like how they got into research. I think on the book on the right is a researcher named Dr. Eppel, and she told us how she was like pre-med, but then got into like health psychology, and like learning their stories was pretty cool. All right, I'm going to move on to the final part of the presentation, the lessons I've learned. The first section I'm going to be talking about is the lesson I learned from other interns. So like when I was talking with a bunch of interns, I noticed this one intern who wanted to be a sports psychologist. And whenever someone talked, he would always like have a notepad ready, being like taking notes. And then after like the discussion, he would be able to use these notes to really just ask great questions, that like were thought-provoking and really showed like critical thinking. So that was something I really admired about him. Taking initiative. There were a lot of interns who volunteered themselves for projects or statistics, and I think that is something I always have a little bit of trouble doing. So I really felt inspired by their actions. And then just general lessons I've learned. These are mainly observations that I hope I could implement and other undergrads should definitely implement. Stuff like the importance of networking. It is through networking where you can get like other opportunities. I was able to like shadow a physician, for example, because I made a good relationship with one of the postdocs. And also finding peers who like your similar type of research is also really fun because you get to talk about similar interests. As I mentioned again, asking questions. And the last thing I do want to mention is stepping outside of your comfort zone. So at the end of the internship, we had to do this presentation, and it was my presentation was about exploring the stress reactivity in individuals working in emergency medical service under the model of challenge and threat. And so when I was actually saying this presentation, I was extremely nervous. I think like ironically, my project was about stress, but I was the most stressed out when I was saying the presentation. But what I meant by stepping outside the comfort zone is that like even though I was super nervous, I still managed to say my piece like coherently and clearly, and I felt proud of doing that. And so now whenever I try to speak publicly, I feel like greater confidence because I managed to overcome, speaking in front of a large crowd where like there was, I think all the staff at UCS, like at the Department of Psychiatry was there, all the interns, all the coordinators. So it was a great challenge for me. And so I think the one takeaway, if you were to listen to the presentation, is that you should definitely step outside of your comfort zone and yeah, just explore new things, basically. I think these are my acknowledgements. That is the end of my presentation. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. Again, yes, you can stop